Somebody asked me about the 79 928. I've had this car since 99 or 2000. I bought it off a divorcing couple. I think I paid $2,200 for it. I've seen it for sale in a parking lot with a for sale sign on it, and I inquired on it, and the wife had the title and said that the husband no longer wanted it. And $2,200 later, I had it in my garage. Now, before this one, I had a blue. It looked like a Z-bar painted blue somewhere up in Chicago, automatic Euro 1980. The Euro is a little bit different. It has the side markers in like the BMWs, a little bit after the wheels here. The American version had the side marker on the front, the blinker, and it had in the back the Euro single like reflector brake light. If you look at some of the Euro models, you could see it. So it was an automatic with the three-speed Mercedes back then. That's what Porsche was using because it was all pretty new stuff. So they're just basically buying the three-speed automatic out of the, what is that, convertible or the little coupe Mercedes that they had. I forget the SL. I forget which one it is. But anyways, in the late 70s. So, and they were just fitting it. The actual, if anybody doesn't know, this is the 944 is the same in a 924. The engine and the bell housing and the clutch is up front, but then it goes through a tube that goes to the back to the transaxle. And this one has a limited slip differential because it is a manual 5-speed. And it seems like back then, if it was a 5-speed manual, it had the 220 locking differential code. And I've jacked it up, and you can spin the wheel, and the other wheel goes both ways. They feel like almost like a solid axle. But there's a certain torque setting you can test to see if the clutch packs are worn and need to be refreshed. And I've done that on there, and these are within spec. So and I think the locking, whatever it is, like 40% locking is probably still pretty close. You would notice it. I think when I drove the car, I noticed that, my younger years, I'd do a burnout like in a turn, or sometimes you give it a little bit of gas and the tire would spin. You'd feel both wheels lock up. So it did. The differential does its function as a locking differential. But anyways, I've always back in the late 70s, I went on a high school trip. Our school, for some reason, I don't know why, I can't remember, maybe it was to teach us industrial or business. We went to the McCormick place in Chicago. It was like 1978 or 79. And this car came out in 77. And I think I actually got close to a black one of these, and I fell in love with this car. And I always wanted a 928. Well, it's kind of sad now that I've kind of letting it get dusty, but thank God I'm getting rejuvenated in my car hobby again. It's like every other hobby, you've fallen in and out of passion with it. So I think I'm getting back to passion this year. So anyways, so this car always had me questioning. The car is associated with a very cool movie that I watched at the theater back in 1983, and that was with Tom Cruise, a real young Tom Cruise, who only had a couple movies under his belt at the time. And that movie is called Risky Business, 1983, Risky Business. And is one cool movie filmed in like the Highland Park area of Chicago. And I went and visited when I was younger, I went to go visit all the scenes with this car. And reason why it's a little bit interesting, and this is, I'm not sure, just a cool guess between me and my wife, is when you watch the U-boat commander scene, when Rebecca De Mornay actually pulls her code and it pulls the manual, because that car was a manual shifter. Although they had 3 cars on set. They actually rented one from a lawyer, and there's a story, you can look that up. And then there's another one that somebody bought in Colorado and was just auctioned off for like a couple $100,000. And that was one Tom Cruise drove and learned how to drive a manual transmission on because he didn't know how to drive it. So this car always had me questioning that scene, because this is a Chicago, imported through Audi Porsche of Chicago. I think Audi dealers were tied in with Porsche back then. I think of Hinsdale or Highland Park. I can't remember where the dealership was. It's no longer there. But there's a U-boat commander scene, if you watch that movie, where after the car goes in the drink, because Rebecca De Mornay pulls her jacket and Tom Cruise jumps on the hood and tries to stop it like he's going to stop a 3,000-pound car. And you can even see, if you watch it, look closely to the front wheels, because of the, the ordinances and codes about dumping a car probably for that scene in water. That was a rental that they rented from studio, a typical Hollywood studio that rents vehicles. They pulled the engine out of it so it wouldn't leak oil into the lake. And you can see that if you look at the wheel wells, you can see the front wheel wells. There's a big distance between it and the fender, showing that a lot of weight's off the front end. I caught that right away. So they did. I did look it up, and they did pull the engine because they didn't want oils and gasoline leaking into lake for environmental impact to film that movie shot. So then when the car was, it's funny. I don't know where that car is, but that was one of the three cars noted in the movie that were used. That car, would they put the engine back in and returned it back to California to the rental company, and who knows where that car is either junked out, or somebody's got a car that was dumped in Lake Michigan. But that's not this car. I'm pretty sure on that. I actually contacted the studio for VIN numbers, because going back to that scene, if when they're in the dealership and the guy walks up, the service guy walks up and says, "Who's the funny line? Who's the U-boat commander?" As they're waiting to get the bad news, because they open the door and fish actually fly out of the car when it's on the rack. If you look at the background car, there's a gold. This is an Opel Gold, they call it, in '79. And these years of the early 928s didn't have body trim panels. The later years, like 81, they started getting, 80 or 81, started getting the side molding, which I like this better. It's cleaner. And that year, so it's 77 through 79 or 80, I think it is. And they were all either 79. There was one 1980 car. One of them, I think, was painted to match that. I forget what, platinum silver or something. It was still like in the gold silver tone. But this is more of an Opel Gold. But if you look at the background of that shot, there is a car on the rack. And my wife and I wonder if this was the car, because there was so little of these imported, and there were so little of them in the 77 through 79 range, which, again, I think 80 or 79 or 80 was the last year for the non-body molded 928s. And I want to say 80, at least in America. I'm not sure about the Euro spec cars. Um, those cars, I think in America, they started getting the body side molding, protect the doors and for dings and dents when you park the car. Typical you see on any cars, like the BMW here. Always, the 325 Ci, the E46 always had the body side molding. So again, being such a short run, it makes us wonder, was this the car on the rack in the background? Because again, look at that scene where they open the door, the fish fly out, camera kind of pans, or it's a back shot, and it shows another late 70s non-body side molded 928 in like a gold color. And it always makes me laugh and wonder if this is the car that was in the background, because this car came from that dealership, and the history tracks in that area. So it could be that there was another gold, or maybe that was more of a platinum. I can't tell exactly by the camera. Again, this is Opel metallic, they call it, for the paint color, with a brown interior. That to me looked like it was maybe a little bit lighter color, but I can't tell for sure. But it's definitely interesting, because I love that movie, and that's the movie that even made me want a 928 even more. It was just it's one of my all-time favorites from my youth. So this, like I said, Tom Cruise learned how to drive on a '79 928. Somebody found that car that when he learned on, they also had an automatic 80. That car was rented from a lawyer, and there was a big hoopla about that. You should, if you're interested about the 928's history on the movie set, you can read. There's some stories about it, how that lawyer was really upset, because I think the studio leased that car off him for like $400 a day, and promised to return it in the same condition. And when they returned it, it needed all kinds of work from all the filming scenes, and the Glencoe, I think it was, the chase scene with the Cadillac with Guido the pimp. I'm not sure which car that was, but like I said, Tom Cruise probably, for any scenes that he was driving, might have been using the 80 automatic. But there were scenes where him and that other guy were cruising to town, and they backed out of the garage and the car stalled. Real cool scenes, especially if you love 928s and older Porsches. They backed out, and the car died, and then they raced that little car, those kids in a little car. That was, I believe, sounded like a manual transmission, and like I said, Tom Cruise was learned how to drive a stick on a 79 928 that was on the studio. He didn't know how to drive one until then. So who knows? It's kind of fun to think about it, but probably not. But there is, if you look at the imported numbers into the US in 78, 79, very, very few in this color. And so if you ever watch the movie Risky Business, 1983, young Tom Cruise, look at the car on the rack in the background as they open the door and the fish fly out of his father's car that he got dumped in Lake Michigan, and he had to do his hoe business to get the money back to get the car fixed because it ain't cheap. It wasn't cheap to fix a Porsche then. This car was like 40 in 1979. I think it was like $41,000, and that was huge money because I think you could buy a brand new Corvette for like 8,000 or 9,000 back then. So if you were buying a 40,000 Porsche 1979 money, that was and this was all the rave because this was the first, front engine V8 powered car. And this was the car that Porsche wanted to move away from the 911 platform because it was air cooled and ever tightening emission regulations in North America, the US. If they wanted to sell, it was a big market for Porsche. And if they wanted to continue selling cars, they knew they had to come up with something that would be emission friendly. And they started water cooling and this was, I think, along with the 924 and 944, the first generations of water cooling Porsche did. Other than that, they were all like on the 911 air cooled. So, this car for a long time was not worth anything. That's why I got it for $2,200. And I think now it's kind of come back in popularity. And this is a no sunroof because if you look at a lot of the 77 through 79s, they do seem to be primarily in manual. If you see manuals, which are rare to find in autos, especially probably here in the US that were imported, manuals are rare. And I don't think I've ever seen an auto with a limited slip differential, a 220 locking differential, they call it. And it's usually the manual and I don't think I've ever seen a manual, 5-speed manual without a locking 220 differential, limited slip differential. So it just seems like maybe that was the way the dealers ordered them for the lots to be available for customers. I don't know. But around 1980, you start seeing a sunroof. And a sunroof on the 928, if you look at the roof section here, here's part of the hatch, okay? If you look at the short roof section, the sunroof was really narrow. It wasn't a big sunroof anyway, so it wasn't really much to write home about. Not like, the whiter BMW or the ones you see on my wife's Lexus. Or even I think this is closer to what it was, but I want to say here's a 99.996 911. And if you look at that sunroof, it's closer, but I actually think the roof was narrower. It was like from here to here, I want to say. So it wasn't a huge sunroof anyways, but I would have loved to have one with a sunroof, but I couldn't pass on this deal. And once I get this fixed and get it sold, I think I'm going to let it go because I do want a 911. And, I don't know what I'm going to do with this one. I have a 3-car garage, and as you can see, I'm able to, because these cars are a little bit shorter, park these cars a certain way where one's angled, one's going long ways, and I can get these cars. And so we can fit 4 cars in a 3-car regular residential garage. So, and I still got room to move around. So it worked. But you get a chance, watch that movie, Risky Business. If you haven't seen it, if you're younger, rent it out or look, on Netflix or whatever. Great movie, and it's just a fun trip. And I just wanted to answer that question. So thanks.